So good to see you all. Thank you for coming along to kind of the July edition of the NEED Network of Environmental Educators in Devon webinar series. And yeah, really good to have a few of you here. Tom from Skerne Lodge, Nikki at Rosemore, and Jeanette at Lew Trenchard Primary School. And this session is recorded, so it'll go out to the wider network. And especially excited to welcome Brendan Stone here.
Thank you, Jess.
First, I just didn't even introduce myself, so I'll just briefly say, so I'm Jess Carter, I'm the chair of NEED, and this is a network that's been going for a long time, but we're really trying to widen it and open it so that it looks like it's an accurate representation of environmental education across Devon. There's loads of different types of environmental education going on, and the brief for sustainability and environment is quite wide these days, more than just outdoor learning, although that's a really important part of it. So please feel free to kind of circulate to your networks. And we have monthly webinars, twice yearly, in-person events, and then sort of ad hoc networking sessions as well. But yeah, I'd really like to see it established as a kind of active, engaged network. There's a WhatsApp group, so you're more than welcome to be a part of that. With my other hat on, I am co-founder of Planting People, which is two strands of business. One is delivering environmental education workshops in schools. The other is supporting businesses with sustainability, which is how we kind of invest in the schools, as well as a lot of fundraising. But yeah, really good to see you and be part of the NEED network. I'm off on my holidays tomorrow, so lots of other people I'm sure have already skipped off away. But Brendan, thank you for coming to speak to you. So if you would like to share your screen and introduce yourself, that'd be brilliant. Thank you.
Can you enable screen sharing for me? I'm disabled. I'm getting a host disabled participant screen sharing. Okay, I got it. Okay, can you see that? Yeah, I'm getting a thumbs up. Excellent, great. Okay, so as it says bottom left hand corner, my job title is Head of Outdoor Learning and the Advisor for Outdoor Education, and my employer is Devon County Council. So I'm the advisor for Devon County Council, the maintained schools that exist within Devon, and the academies and independent schools that buy the advice service. We've got over 600 establishments from Penzance to Croydon that use the Devon advice service. So each local authority will have some form of advice service, either as part of the local authority, or they can point you to your own. But those of you in the southwest, you may be using the Cornwall, or schools may be using the Cornwall service, the Plymouth service, Dorset, Wiltshire, etc. And I'm in regular contact with all of those advisors. So if you want to contact me and find out who your local authority advisor is, I can certainly put you in touch with those people if you've got questions for them specifically. Bottom right hand corner has my email address, so feel free to take a note of that. You're welcome to contact me at any time about school offsite visits, etc., your role, how you can support that. Happy to talk to you about those. And also my mobile number is down there. So once again, feel free to make a note of that and give me a call, okay, if you've got any questions after today. Okay. So this is what we're going to be covering, okay. We're going to be looking at the law, okay, and how that relates to schools specifically in terms of offsite visits. And we're going to be looking at the similar law and how that relates to external providers and venues, okay, and I'll explain the difference between the two in a moment. I'll explain what schools must do in terms of meeting the law and local authority policy, and likewise for any external providers and venues, okay. For some reason, there we go. It was going a bit slow. So educational visits is what we talk about. Sometimes people use the term trips. Okay, we try and dissuade people from using the term trip. It's not a holiday, it's an educational visit. Okay, it's a lesson. Okay, so like as with any lesson, there ought to be some clear educational aims and purposes from it. And if it's not educational, why are schools bothering to do it? They're busy enough doing other things. And with all teaching and learning, we expect that to be high quality. So we would expect schools to have a clear set of objectives about the lesson, whether it be at Rosemore Garden or at the Skern Lodge, etc. There needs to be some purpose behind it and an educational purpose. Okay. So external providers and venues. So I focus this session on what external companies and people might need to do in terms of working with schools. I say I'm the local authority advisor for Devon and Torbay councils. Other local authorities will have similar processes, but they're not all quite the same. So our professional body is the Outdoor Education Advisors Panel, and all of the advisors in the Southwest are members of that body. So we have similar arrangements in line with our professional body, but some slight differences. So I'm going to speak about what we do in Devon and Torbay. But as I said earlier, if you've got questions about your own local authority advisor or their service, then I can put you in touch and they can answer your specific questions. So within the local authority policy, we specify different types of people under different names. So we have both external providers and venues. So when we use the term provider within the local authority offsite visits policy, it specifically means those people or those companies that provide adventurous activities, that provide accommodation, and by that we mean a bed and a roof, and overseas travel companies. Okay, those are what we mean by external providers. Adventurous activities are the sorts of things you would think about if you talked about outdoor education, outdoor pursuits, those kinds of things. So you're caving, climbing, kayaking, those kinds of things. But the bit where we overlap into environmental education often is in forest school type activities. And I use the word type because people can be precious about what is and what isn't forest school. But we talk about forest school type activities, and they are considered to be adventurous if the children are lighting fires themselves or children are using edged tools themselves. Okay, so things like knives, saws, etc. So if you are a company or a business or an organization that provides educational opportunities for children and you include forest school type activities during which children will be lighting their own fires or using edged tools themselves, then you have become a provider in the local authority sense. Okay. So you might be, let's say, a farm or a horticultural centre, and you don't do any of those types of things. Okay, children don't light fires, they don't use edge tools and knives and stuff, and therefore you would be considered a venue. Everywhere else, if you don't fit the top criteria, everywhere else is considered to be a venue by the local authority. Okay, and we treat them both slightly differently. So we have external providers for adventurous activities and accommodation, and those forest school type activities where children are lighting fires or using edged knives, edged tools, and then everywhere else, everyone else is classed as a venue. So let's have a look at the law. Okay, so the critical thing is that the most important piece of legislation that governs our work, whether it's schools taking part in school visits, or external providers or venues providing their services, is the Health and Safety at Work Act. I haven't put the date up there. I wasn't sure whether we'd have a chat enabled, but 1974 is when the Health and Safety at Work Act was enacted. So it's not new. Okay, there are people in this room, I'm sure, people watching this video later that weren't even born in 1974. Section 2 of that act states that it is the responsibility of employers, okay, to ensure so far as is reasonably practicable that the health, safety and welfare of their employers whilst they're at work. So from a school's perspective, that means they're teachers, TAs, okay? People who are employed by the school is responsible, whether it be a local authority maintained school or an academy trust. And then for other companies like providers and venues, that law about employees relates to your staff and also your volunteers, okay? Because volunteers working on behalf of a company are deemed to be the employer's responsibility. So section 2 talks about the employer's responsibility to staff to provide a reasonably practicable, safe environment. Section 3 of the same Act relates to other people who aren't employed by the business, by the company, but are affected by it, okay? Shall be the duty of every employer to conduct his undertaking in such a way as to ensure, so far as is reasonably practicable, that persons not in his employment who may be affected thereby are not exposed to risks to their health or safety. So the first thing to notice is its sexist language. It talks about him and his because it's 1974. And in a school setting, that Health and Safety at Work Act, section 3.1, relates to pupils, any volunteers or parent helpers that might be engaged in the educational visit with the school, okay? And for any providers or venues, that means your customers and any visitors to your premises, to your services, okay? So the Health and Safety at Work Act specifies that it's the business's, the company's responsibility to keep your customers safe so far as is reasonably practicable. All right. So even though they're not working for you, the school of visits, okay, should expect you to keep them reasonably safe. We can't remove risks from life altogether, but we should be able to reduce them to an acceptable level. Okay. In addition to that 1974 Act, there are further regulations from 1999, which go into a bit more detail about employers, businesses, companies having health and safety policies. If you have 5 or more employees, you must write down your risk assessment. If you have less than 5, the law says you don't need to write down your risk assessment. But as we'll talk about in a minute, okay, it would be good practice for you to document your risk management plans, even if you are a sole trader or have 1 or 2 people working alongside you. You also, as a business, need to report accidents and incidents, and you need to risk assess your activities. So whatever you do, whether it be a farm, a horticulture, a waste disposal plant, whatever it is, okay, you need to risk assess the business, the activities of the business. You need to make sure your staff have appropriate training and information to control the risks. And a critical one is that people need to be competent to carry out specific tasks. It doesn't say qualified, it says competent. So for some things, okay, from a school's perspective, when they take part in a visit to a waste recycling plant, there isn't a qualification for teachers to do in order to go to a waste recycling plant. But it's the head teacher's decision as to whether they consider that employee to be competent to carry out that activity, carry out that school visit safely, okay? And then you need to have some kind of procedures just in case things go wrong, because even the best laid plans sometimes go awry. And then the whole system, your whole documents, policies, procedures need to be monitored and reviewed, okay, to make sure they're still fit for purpose. In addition to the Health and Safety at Work Act, we have the Children Act, which states that people who do not have parental responsibility, but nonetheless have care of a child, may do what is reasonable in all the circumstances of the case for the purpose of safeguarding or promoting the child's welfare. So the school has a higher duty of care than you might as a provider or a venue. The school is responsible for the children. You have a responsibility under Health and Safety at Work Act for visitors and customers, but the school has a higher duty of care. They know the children. So they would know if a particular child had an allergy or an illness or a medical condition that needed particular attention. Then they may share that with you in order that you can do your best to provide a reasonably safe environment. Okay, but that is their responsibility. You don't know the needs of every child coming to visit. your site or your location. The school has that information and they need to communicate with you about how best to meet that individual child's needs. Department for Education gives guidance on school visits, okay, and it talks about taking a common sense and proportionate approach. Risk assessment and risk management are tools to enable children to undertake activities safely and not prevent them from taking place. And it goes on to say that sensible risk management cannot remove risk altogether, but should avoid needless or unhelpful paperwork. And I'll talk about what we consider needless or unhelpful paperwork in a minute. When I work with schools, and I do a lot of training for schools and in schools, there's often a fear that if something goes wrong, they will be criticised or prosecuted. The reality is that the health and safety executive, who are the statutory body responsible for investigating accidents and, if necessary, bringing prosecutions against schools, the reality is that they have a much more, shall we say, relaxed view on risk management than people might perceive. Okay, health and safety law is often used as an excuse to stop children taking part in exciting activities, but well-managed risk is good for them. They won't understand about risk if they're wrapped in cotton wool. Risk itself won't damage children, but ill-managed and overprotective actions could. So that's the reality, okay? That's the statement from the statutory body that's responsible for investigating things when they go wrong. They start off with a, yes, there are risks in the world, children need to understand them, we don't want to wrap them in cotton wool. That's their starting point. They don't expect a perfectly safe world. And I use this example when I give training to schools. It's not conker time of year at the moment, but it will be soon. And it talks about the myths in schools about not being allowed to play conkers. Okay. Says in the bottom paragraph, realistically, the risk from playing conkers is incredibly low and just not worth bothering about. If kids deliberately hit each over the head with conkers, that's a discipline issue, not health and safety. So once again, just an example of the reality, okay? We are not expected to remove all risks and hazards from the world. It's often the risks and hazards that are the attractive feature of an activity, going fast, going far, going fast. Yeah, those are the things that draw us to lots of activities in the outside world. And we can't remove those risks altogether. We just need to manage them so far as is reasonably practicable. So how do schools comply with the law? Well, they follow the local authority policy, and there's a picture of the front page of the policy there. And that document is about 100 pages long, and it explains all of that legislation, and it gives specific guidance and advice on things like ratios for school visits, different types of visits. I think it talks about parental consent, talks about equality, talks about disability, all sorts of things. Okay, so that's a document that is edited every 2 years to make sure it's up to date. And then beneath that, schools will have their own local policy, which is a much shorter document. And in that policy, it will specify who is responsible for what and how the school will go about making sure their off-site visits are managed appropriately. Beneath that sits something called the school standard operating procedures, and that's their risk assessment templates. I'll show you an example in a minute. Okay, so they have their policy, they have their risk assessment documents, and then they record their off-site visits on a website called Evolve. Most local authorities across the country use this website, not all. So Cornwall have their own version. Okay, they have their own website that they use. Plymouth use Evolve, Devon and Torbay use Evolve, Dorset uses Evolve, Wiltshire uses Evolve, Somerset Council, which is smaller than it once was because they've now got some larger unitary bodies in that area, but Somerset Council use their own particular type of website. But each local authority will have some method by which schools submit their plans, they record what they're planning to do, where they're planning to go, and then the visit gets approved by the head teacher, and certain types of visits then have to be endorsed by the local authority. So adventurous activities and overseas visits within Devon need to be endorsed by the local authority, and that's a large part of my role. Okay, so in June, I'm seeing about 100 visits a day coming to me to look at and check, and I check where they're going, and I check the providers, and we'll talk about the provider checks in a minute, and I check their risk assessments to make sure everything appears to be managed in a reasonably practicable, safe way. That's a picture of Evolve. Okay, it's just showing you that. I say used by lots of different local authorities. Each one's slightly different. So if you're working with a school in Plymouth, they might have slightly different expectations from Devon. Once again, slightly different from Dorset, but they're all very similar. Okay. So this is a screenshot of just the front page of one of the risk assessment templates, and they go on for several pages, but the document is pre-populated in the middle column with all of the must-dos, and like I say, it goes on for several pages. And the way it works in Devon is the visit leader, the teacher running the trip, will take this document. They will make it fit their trip by filling in the top box when they're going and where they're going. And then what they're expected to do is in the right-hand column, they will make any additional comments about perhaps individual students, individual pupils that maybe have additional needs. Okay, so just short passages like Charlie B in Form 4 has a wooden leg, don't let him go in the sea, things like that. Okay, so for most visits that schools will do to places like yourselves, they are very straightforward. They don't have to go into loads of detail. They just have to do what is reasonably practicable to reduce the risks to an acceptable level. Okay. When schools use external providers, remember providers are those that provide adventurous activities, accommodation, or overseas travel. Schools are specifically told not to request your risk assessments. Okay, that's peppered throughout the local authority policies and documents. It's all over the place. They sometimes do, okay, because they think they ought to, but they're then told they don't need to. If they don't know the location and the environment, okay, or they're not competent to lead an activity, so for example, they're going to go to Skerne Lodge to go kayaking, there is no point in them asking for Skerne Lodge's kayaking risk assessment. They're not qualified kayak coaches. They don't know what the appropriate buoyancy aids are. Okay, they don't understand things about tides. Yeah, so there's no point in them asking for a document for the sake of it. That's what would be considered needless and unhelpful paper chase, like we saw from the DFE statement earlier. Okay, so they're told not to ask for your risk assessments for your activities or for your buildings. That's your responsibility. Instead, schools use one of two methods to make sure that you as the provider meet certain standards. And there's two methods. One is the local authority provider questionnaire form. Okay, I'll show you an example of that in a minute. And the other is the learning outside the classroom quality badge. And some of you might be familiar with that. Okay. So a couple of screenshots of the local authority form. And this goes to providers, and it is sent out each year in January by my colleagues from the Devon Health and Safety team, and it gets sent to anybody that's already on the system, somebody that filled it in last year. Okay, if you haven't used this form before, and perhaps you've just started offering visits to schools and you are offering an adventurous activity, so you're climbing, kayaking, caving, or forest school type activities where children are lighting fires or using tools, then the school would ask you to complete this, and then they would send this document to the local authority. And then once it's in the system, you would get a new form sent each January. Okay, but it's got a range of questions and it's a self-declaration. Okay, so it talks about your risk management, okay, your accident emergency procedures, your staff recruitment and things like that. Yeah, goes on further on, it talks about, there's a section on adventurous activities, so that would apply if children are doing forest school type activities or the more adventurous traditional sort of outdoor pursuits. And once again, it asks about your staff, their competence, okay, and your accreditation. So if you're an adventurous activity provider and you have what's called an ARLA license from the Adventurous Activity Licensing Authority, you would put your ARLA license in there, and then the local authority can go on the website for ARLA and they can check that's current and up to date. Okay, so we're not expecting yeses for each of these questions. We're asking you for an honest answer, and then it's up to the school to make a judgment about whether they think your answers are sufficient or appropriate for their needs. And then I get involved sometimes because schools might ask a question. I can look at the form and I can say, well, what you've put down in terms of accreditation doesn't appear to be sufficient. I can then contact the provider and do the technical speak with them if needs be. Okay. So it's a self-declaration. The schools read it. They then make a judgment whether it meets their needs. If necessary, they can ask further questions, and I can ask further questions on their behalf if it gets a bit technical. Okay. So that's the local authority provider form. They are similar across all the local authorities, but we all have slightly different tweaks depending on what questions we want to ask. As I said, they're done annually in January. If you come in partway through the year, that's fine. The school will send you a form, you complete it, and then they send it on to the local authority. Okay. Schools should be reading those things before they're making bookings. Too often we get involved with situations where schools have paid for something, and then when they've then finally got the form the week before they're due to go, it raises questions perhaps about the provider's accreditation or staff qualifications. Excuse me. And often we're then faced with last minute changes to the programs, and it happens every year. We've just finished the silly season in schools in June and July, where they're doing hundreds of visits every day, and there's always one or two that have to be changed at the last minute because they've entered into a contract, they've made a booking somewhere, and then the local authority is saying, we're not happy with you doing that activity at that place for one reason or another. Okay. So because we're saying to the schools not to go chasing risk assessments, we're encouraging schools to talk to providers about the quality of the day. What's the purpose? What are the educational aims and outcomes? Yeah. So by all means, schools can be speaking to you and you can be speaking to them, but don't get involved in a needless and unhelpful paper chase. And I know centres, activity centres, for example, often get asked for risk assessments from schools. Part of my job is that I oversee our two outdoor centres on Dartmoor, Pixie's Holt and the Dartmoor Training Centre, and we have a sort of a set message that we give to schools when they ask, and we email them back the reasons why it's not appropriate or necessary for them to ask for our risk assessments. But some providers just send them out as a matter of course. Some will send them out if they're asked, and that's fine. I don't want you to fall out with your customers, but by the same token, I'm equally happy for you to say you don't need them because the local authority policy says don't ask for them. Okay. And once again, I'm happy to get involved in those conversations. Like I said, I don't want people to fall out with each other over it. It's just a bit of paper at the end of the day. But I do want schools to understand that they're not expected to, because there's no point in asking for a climbing risk assessment that talks about grees and belay methods if the year 5 teacher has no understanding of climbing. Okay. The other method that we use for providers is the learning outside the classroom quality badge. And some people I know have got this. I know Skern Lodge, Tom at Skern Lodge has got the LOTC quality badge. So the local authority is happy with either the local authority provider or provider form, or you have this national accreditation. Okay. And this is used by lots of different people, not just what we in Devon would call a provider. So museums and galleries, for example, can gain the LOTC quality badge. And there are different routes for different types of organizations. So here's the front page of the website, and then clicking through some of the links, it has 2 routes. It's got the one for the sort of the museums and galleries you can see on the left-hand picture, and on the right-hand side, do you offer activities that require technical knowledge and experience? And you just go through each of the different doors. Okay, and then you complete a tabletop exercise. You provide the information for the Learning Outside the Classroom Council. They in then turn will do some kind of audit. They might visit you in person, or they might do it online. A lot more of it is done online nowadays for reasons you can understand. But then you would gain that accreditation. Okay, the Learning Outside the Classroom Quality Badge. It does come at a cost, but a different cost for different types of organizations, but you can look at that on their website. Okay. And then those that have that accreditation don't need to fill in the provider questionnaire. Schools can see on the Evolve website that you have that accreditation. That information is automatically uploaded by the Learning Outside the Classroom people. So you shouldn't need to be asked for the provider form if you've already got that badge. So it's up to you if you choose to go down this route. Like all these things, it's often the process that's more helpful than the badge. It's a good process in terms of self-analysis about what you offer to schools and how you offer it, your information that you provide to schools, the quality of what you provide. So that process of self-accreditation, self-determination is useful. And if you meet the standards, you get the badge. But like I say, often it's going through the process that's more helpful than the badge. The badge has been around for 15 years maybe now, and most schools still don't know it exists. So not having it shouldn't mean you don't get schools to use your services, but having it does give schools reassurance about the quality of what you offer. Okay. Once again, even if you have that badge, we're telling schools not to go chasing risk assessments, but by all means to speak to you about the quality of what you're offering, how the day is going to run, what the aims and objectives are, and perhaps conversation about one or two individual children that might have additional needs. Maybe they need access to a certain part of the building, and is there a ramp, and all those kinds of things. Okay. So that's what we talk about when we meet. So that's what we mean when we talk about providers. Yeah. Anyone else, anywhere else, if you're not a provider, you're considered to be a venue. Yep. So from the local authority's perspective, within our policy, if you're not a provider, you're a venue. And once again, schools are specifically told not to request risk assessments from venues. So garden centres, horticultural places, shops, galleries, those kinds of places, they're venues. Okay. Don't bother going chasing bits of paper. They're not going to tell you anything you need to know. If you've got a building that you invite schools into, then you'll have a risk assessment for the building that'll talk about maybe making sure the fire exits are kept clear and the fire alarms are tested and those kinds of things. There's nothing in there that's going to make that teacher's job any easier in terms of supervising the children. Their responsibility is look after the children. Your responsibility is provide a reasonably safe location. Okay, but once again, if you're not a provider but you're a venue, it's fine for schools to talk to you about what are you going to do, where are we going to do it, all those kinds of things. Any questions?
Oh, thank you very much, Brendan. That was really clearly put.
Thank you.
A
And
lot
bang on half an hour.
and I think a lot of people kind of sigh a big sigh of relief when they see it all laid out rather than having to filter it through
Yeah,
themselves. So thank
yeah.
you.
And it can be challenging because, as I've said, even though we've got a great big local authority policy which has been in existence for decades, and all the training I provide to schools, there are still teachers out there that don't know what they should be asking and ask the wrong things. Okay, so you as providers and venues will often get asked by schools for documents, for information that's at odds with what they should be doing. Okay, so yeah, hearing it from me might be helpful. Okay.
Oh, thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Nikki, do you want to go?
Right, yeah, thank you. No, that was really helpful. We've had quite a lot of schools asking for risk assessments lately.
Yeah.
And prior, when I was at school, I thought that I had to say, no, you can't have them. But I was worried that something might be different and I was saying the wrong thing. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
How much more difficult is it to be a provider, not a venue? because some of our activities that we're running this summer are forest school based. Children will use fire stills, and that's outside of school visits, I think, because it's family activities.
Okay.
But how much harder would that be for me to organise if we were to bring those activities into our school visits programme?
Not difficult at all. You fill in that form, and if you email me, I'll send you a copy of the form.
Okay, lovely.
You just fill in a form, like I said, self-declaration. That then gets added to Evolve. So when a
Yeah.
school is planning to come to you, so a school from Torrington High School want to come to you, they can see that form has already been completed. They can read it. They can make sure they're happy with it, and they crack on. Job done.
Brilliant, thank you.
Okay.
And just one more thing.
Yeah.
Do you know where like scout and guide groups fall in outdoor visits? Are they like more like a school, or are they like something different?
They're more like something very different. Okay.
Right.
So those sort of uniformed youth groups have their own policies and procedures, and they can be, should we say, quite traditional at times, and that can be problematic. They have their own sort of award levels for their own staff, that they can do certain things. So let's say a scout group want to do a residential, then the scout leaders would need to have a certain level of scout training about running residential, etc. But they're obviously, if they're not running the activity, they're just arriving at your place, okay, then that should be reasonably simple for them to do. But they do have some, like I say, slightly traditional views on things. And I say that because in my other role as overseeing the 2 outdoor centres, we would occasionally have the likes of Girl Guides specifically coming, wanting to come and stay at the buildings, and they would have to go through certain sort of pre-vetting checkings that our centres were appropriate for Girl Guides, even though those girls might have been at the centre the week before with their school.
Okay.
And we did have issues about having a male caretaker and things like that, which slightly bizarre in the current world. But there we go. So it shouldn't be problematic, but they have their own systems.
Yeah, because we haven't had many uniform groups here, but that's something we want to try and encourage. But I didn't know if they wouldn't ask for like the LOTC badge and things like a school would. They would turn up and do whatever
I'm aware. Absolutely, yeah. They might be asked, or they might be told to go through a needless and unhelpful paper chase of asking for your risk assessments. Like I said, I don't want you falling out with your customers, but reasonably, somebody who's not expert in running a horticultural centre can't reasonably make a judgment about whether your risk assessment is appropriate or not.
No, that's true. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay. Anybody else? Hi, Tom.
Brendan, I was going to say that this recording should be almost like required viewing, I think, for any provider in the county, but also any school lead. So a bomber 30 minutes, Brendan. Thank you very much for that. And I know as soon as Jess sends around the recording link, a few folks to send it off to. So thank you very much for that.
That's fine.
Oh yeah, brill. And what you were saying about the that paper chase back and forth, I think it mirrors my experience as well, that it feels like the right thing to do, and it's often the totemic exchange,
absolutely,
which just builds confidence, and sometimes I do delight when you send a Google Drive and that confirmation ping to say that they've opened it never comes. So the school receives it, but nobody actually reads it their end.
Absolutely.
And I think I do encourage customers to do their due diligence checks for anyone that they sign into a business agreement with, or choose to go into a financial agreement with. Absolutely. Just like a school auditing the boiler installation company or the tarmac installation company who's doing the staff car park, they should do their due diligence checks on their strategic partners for providers and all of that type of stuff. But Brendan, that local authority guidance doc and that Evolve system has been revolutionary, I think, for expediting that trip and removing one of the massive barriers for schools going on that learning away trip, which is the mysticism around what's right, what's wrong. That's that LOTC quality badge, just to emphasize it for anyone on the call now and for anyone watching the video afterwards. is like a red hot, you know, knife cutting through so much, you know, confusion and skepticism maybe about a provider. And again, that Evolve system is great. And I celebrate any young teacher who wants to organise that learning away trip, whether it be 1 day or 5 nights or what have you. And it seems like yeah, the system and the support, Brendan, by yourself is there. So yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, excellent 30 minutes. Cheers.
Cool. Thanks, Tom. Like you say, there's a lot of misinformation on the part of providers and schools, and you know, the policy's there, the training's there, it's all on the website that schools use, but people just don't read things. And the challenge I have, and I say this quite a bit, the challenge I have is when I'm trying to influence behaviours of teachers running school visits, I am often trying to wallpaper the hallway through the letterbox. So I've got contact with the head teacher or maybe the educational visits coordinator in school, but I am trying to tell them what they need to tell their staff. And that's where often the message gets lost. So I do provide training in schools, specifically for individual schools, and I give them a sort of an hour and a half shortened version. The longer version is a day's training course that I do for head teachers and EVCs. But those that engage, great, they're on board, but there's a large proportion of people that, as ever, they just don't engage and they don't read policy. So those are the ones that's difficult to influence because you just don't even get hold of them. So if you, once again, if you share the same message at your end, then that's great.
I suspect, like any of us, there's some subjects which become a kind of block. Like if anybody talks to me about accountancy, it's like a different language, and I need someone like you to like spell it out.
Yeah.
And I think we all have that kind of thing. So I'm sure there's teachers who think, oh, I can't even.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Too scary. But it's really, that's why it's particularly great to have these sessions, because then, you know, it's
demystify things a bit.
Demystifies it, absolutely. Absolutely.
Cool.
So any other questions?
Any other questions?
Before we go into kind of general discussion?
No. Cool.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Brendan. I'm just going to switch the recording off so we can just chat and share about our projects.